Hey guys, welcome back to the channel.
Now, I know this may sound a little weird, but let me ask you something. Have you ever thought about what would happen if you walked into a room full of dead bodies?
Yeah, I know, it's a pretty intense start. But hang with me. It might sound morbid, but trust me, it's actually going to lead us to one of the most fascinating conversations about something we all care about: our health, and specifically, cancer. Now, the reason I bring up this room of bodies is because it's a question that a lot of students, people, and even myself have asked.
And what's the connection between all these different types of cancer that you might see on autopsy reports or in the news?
Why is cancer so deadly?
I bet you can guess, but I'm sure you'll be surprised by the connection.
I want to walk you through not only the science of how cancer starts, but also the incredible things our bodies are already doing to stop it. Plus, I'll tell you about a few things we can do to make sure we give our bodies the best chance possible to fight it. But first, let's dive into the science and look at some of the bodies that have been preserved in this lab. These bodies, unfortunately, died from different forms of cancer: colon cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, but they all share something in common that made them fatal. And trust me, you're going to want to hear about it.
Let's start from the basics. So, let's take a step back and understand how cancer begins. Cancer starts when the cells in our body begin to grow uncontrollably. And by uncontrollably, I mean they ignore all the normal signals that tell them when to stop dividing, when to repair themselves, or when to die.
And guess what? All of that starts from something simple: DNA. DNA is basically the instruction manual for everything that happens inside your body. It tells your cells how to function, when to divide, when to rest, and most importantly, when they should die, which is called apoptosis. Apoptosis is a process that makes sure old or damaged cells don't live on and cause trouble. But here's the thing. Every time a cell divides, the DNA has to be copied. That's a lot of chances for mistakes to happen, right?
And sometimes those mistakes happen in ways that cause cells to ignore the signals they're supposed to follow.
These mistakes or mutations can lead to cancer. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't know: your body has amazing defenses to stop this.
Before we get into all the science, let's think about this. Even though cancer is scary, not all mutated cells end up becoming cancer.
In fact, most don't. Why?
Well, there are several things happening in your body that make sure cancer doesn't form, and most of them are happening without you even knowing it.
So, let's break it down a little further. Cancer happens when certain genes in our cells become mutated. These genes are like the instructions for how cells grow and divide.
When these instructions are messed up, the cells stop responding to the normal signals.
You've probably heard of something called oncogenes, right? These are the bad guys, the genes that, when mutated, become cancer-causing.
Think of them like the rebels in a movie, deciding to break the rules and wreak havoc.
Normally, these genes control how cells divide. But when they're mutated, they go rogue and cause cells to divide without stopping. And then there's the opposite of oncogenes, tumor suppressor genes.
You can think of these as the superheroes.
These genes are supposed to suppress or stop the bad guys. When everything is working right, these tumor suppressor genes stop cells from dividing too much, essentially acting like the brakes on your car. But if these tumor suppressor genes are mutated or damaged, the brakes are gone. The cells keep growing. And that's when we get cancer.
But here's the crazy part: most of the time, even if you have mutations in these genes, the cells don't become cancerous. Why? Because of all the built-in safeguards your body has. We have things like immune cells that patrol your body looking for abnormal cells. If they find something off, like a cell that has mutated DNA, they'll destroy it before it gets the chance to spread.
And a lot of times, these mutated cells die off before they can do any damage. Now, here's the kicker. There are certain conditions that make it more likely for mutated cells to survive. Some mutations actually make it so that the immune system can't recognize and destroy these bad cells. And that's when things get tricky. Now, you might be thinking, if I have all these mutations happening in my body, why don't I get cancer every day? And that's a fair question. Here's the thing: your body is constantly fixing mistakes. Every time a cell divides, the DNA is checked and proofread to make sure there are no errors. There's a whole process in place to repair those errors before the cell can go off and divide again. But still, every few million cells, you'll get a mistake that's big enough to lead to a mutated cell. So why doesn't that turn into cancer?
Well, first off, most of the time, That mutated cell doesn't have the ability to survive.
It's not good at reproducing, so it just dies off.
Second, those tumor suppressor genes are usually still doing their job, stopping the cell from dividing too much. And third, your immune system is on the lookout for cells that are behaving badly.
Think of it like your own personal security team, making sure nothing gets past them. But even with all these checks in place, sometimes a mutated cell gets through the cracks. But let's take it one step further.
What causes these mutations in the first place? Well, as you can imagine, our bodies are constantly making new cells, trillions of them each year. So you can see why there are plenty of chances for mistakes to happen. But here's the thing, your body has built-in defenses that try to stop mutations before they even happen. Cells copy their DNA with incredible precision before they divide. And after that, there's a proofreading process to catch any mistakes.
If a mistake is found, the DNA is repaired before the cell even divides.
Even with all these precautions though, there are still some cells that slip through the cracks.
And that's when chance comes into play. In some cases, it's just bad luck. A mistake happens, and a mutated cell is born.
But here's where things get more interesting. Certain factors can increase the likelihood of mutations happening. These are things like ionizing radiation, think X-rays, gamma rays, ultraviolet light from the sun, and even things like cigarette smoke. All of these things can cause DNA damage and increase the risk of mutations.
And guess what? When these things happen, they make it much more likely for cancer to develop. You've probably heard about carcinogen substances that cause cancer.
Well, cigarette smoke is one of the biggest culprits.
It's packed with carcinogens that cause mutations in our DNA.
But it's not just chemicals. Physical damage, like repeated injuries or irritation, can also lead to cancer. For example, when tissue is repeatedly damaged, your body has to produce new cells to repair it. The more cells divide, the more chances there are for mutations to occur. There are also certain viruses that can cause cancer. These viruses insert their genetic material into your cells, causing them to mutate. And let's not forget about your genetics.
If your family has a history of cancer, you might already have some mutations in your genes, making it easier for cancer to develop. So, what makes cancer cells so dangerous?
Well, it's all about how they behave.
Cancer cells grow and divide uncontrollably.
Eventually, they form a mass called a tumor. But here's where it gets tricky. Some tumors are benign, meaning they're less likely to spread, while others are malignant, meaning they can break off and spread to other parts of your body.
This spreading is called metastasis, and it's one of the main reasons cancer is so deadly. Once cancer cells spread, they can invade other organs and tissues, causing major damage.
Malignant tumors are especially dangerous because they're not contained in a capsule. They can break apart and spread through your bloodstream or lymphatic system to other organs.
This is what makes cancer so hard to treat.
When cancer spreads, it's much more difficult to remove the tumor or stop it from growing.
Now, here's the good news. Early detection of cancer can make a huge difference.
If cancer is caught early enough, it's much easier to treat and sometimes even cure. That's why regular checkups and screenings are so important. Whether it's a mammogram for breast cancer, a colonoscopy for colon cancer, or a skin check for melanoma, these screenings can save lives.
The sooner cancer is found, the better the chances of survival. And speaking of treatment, let's talk about one of the most common ways cancer is treated: chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is designed to target rapidly dividing cells, which is what cancer cells do. The problem, though, is that other healthy cells in your body divide quickly too, like the cells in your hair and skin.
That's why chemotherapy often causes side effects like hair loss, nausea, and fatigue.
But chemotherapy works because cancer cells are metabolically active. They're always dividing and growing, so they take up more of the drugs designed to kill them. The tricky part, however, is that while chemotherapy kills cancer cells, it can also damage healthy cells in the process.
Alright, so what's the big takeaway here?
First, cancer is not just one disease. It's a collection of diseases that all start the same way, with a mutation in the DNA of a cell. And while most mutated cells don't become cancer, it only takes a few mutations and the right conditions for cancer to start.
The body has amazing defenses, but sometimes they're not enough to stop cancer from forming. Early detection is key. The sooner you find cancer, the better your chances are for treatment. And remember, lifestyle choices matter too.
Eating well, avoiding carcinogens like tobacco, protecting your skin from UV radiation, and exercising can all reduce your risk of developing cancer.
That's it for today's video.
I hope you learned something new about how cancer starts, why it spreads, and how we can better protect ourselves.
If you found this helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay healthy out there.